Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're jumping straight into a really interesting set of sources, covering quite a bit of ground in India demographics, social issues, even core democratic principles. Our goal, as always, is to pull out the key insights for you. We've got 6 articles lined up, starting right off with the editorial section. Okay, first up, an editorial that really puts the spotlight on India's youth. I mean, we often hear about it, but the scale is just huge. UNICEF figures show 371 million people aged 15 to 29. That's the world's largest youth population right there.
It is, and that number, it represents its incredible potential, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The potential to boost India's GDP maybe by up to $1 trillion by 2030, but at the same time, it throws up some pretty significant challenges,
Right.
which is why that UN theme for World Population Day is so relevant, empowering young people to create the families they want. It really emphasizes agency, choice, control, capital, as the article puts it.
So agency is key. How are we actually doing with that? I know there's been progress, like the Beti Bachao initiative. Child marriage rates are down by half since 2006.
True, progress has been made, definitely. But that rate is still reported at 23.3% nationally.
Still quite high.
Exactly. And adolescent fertility, while lower overall, it hides these really stark regional differences. So yes, policy helps, but there seems to be something more fundamental still missing for many.
Which points to why these challenges persist, right?
Precisely. And the UNFPA's State of World Population Report for 2025, it really digs into this. It talks about a crisis of reproductive autonomy.
A crisis? How so?
Well, look at the figures they found. 36% of Indian adults facing unintended pregnancies, and 30% saying they couldn't achieve their reproductive goals of the family size they wanted.
Wow. So it's not just about access, it's about genuine choice being limited.
It seems so. It points to freedom of choice being restricted by, well, various barriers, social, economic, maybe even structural ones.
Okay, but the article doesn't just dwell on problems, does it? It highlights some strategies that seem to be working.
Yes, and this is where it gets quite hopeful, actually. It mentions these multi-pronged strategies, like Project Udan in Rajasthan.
Ugh, Udan, yes. What did
Yeah.
that achieve?
Between 2017 and 2022, it focused on keeping girls in secondary school, using existing government scholarships, and improving access to contraception. The result? They prevented nearly 30,000 child marriages.
30,000, that's significant.
It really is. And then there's Project Manzil, also in Rajasthan. From 2019 to 2025, it helped 16,000 young women move from skills training into skilled jobs, giving them that economic independence.
So education and economic empowerment seem to be the levers.
Absolutely. These projects show how investing in girls' education and their economic future directly boosts their reproductive agency. It's not just about healthcare access in isolation. It's about equipping them to lead independent lives, contributing fully, just as the UN Secretary General suggests. You know, the 2025 report really hammers this home progress needs universal access to contraception, safe abortion, maternal health, and tackling those deeper barriers like education, housing, childcare, workplace flexibility.
Okay, that focus on reproductive agency and choice actually leads quite nicely into our second editorial. We've just talked about India's large youth population, but globally, you hear a lot of noise about the opposite problem: population decline. People like Elon Musk warning about a potential population collapse. He's even funded initiatives related to this. So is this alarm valid?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? How accurate are these alarms?
Yeah.
This editorial argues that, frankly, a lot of this alarmism is premature and maybe analytically flawed.
Flawed how?
Take the UN's own data, the World Population Prospects, the WPP 2024. It actually predicts the world population will continue to grow.
Grow, not shrink.
Yes, grow to a peak of about 10.3 billion around the mid-2080s, then a slight decline towards the end of the century. Now, that 2100 figure is a bit lower than forecasts from a decade ago, but it's hardly a collapse.
Yeah.
It's a very different picture from the panic you sometimes hear.
Right. So it's important to differentiate between projections and, well, certain predictions.
Exactly. The article makes 2 really key points here. First, projections aren't destiny, right? They depend on assumptions. And second, there's this thing called population momentum.
Population momentum. Can you explain that a bit?
Think of it like a big ship. Even after you cut the engines, it keeps moving for a while. Similarly, even if fertility rates fall below the replacement level, that's about 2.1 children per woman, the population can keep growing for decades.
Why is that?
Because you still have a large number of young people from previous generations moving into their reproductive years. So even if they have fewer children each, the total number of births can stay high for a time. That's why any talk of imminent collapse is usually overblown.
Okay, so the numbers might not be collapsing soon, but the article, like the previous one, seems to shift the focus.
It does. It argues the real fertility crisis isn't about the number of births, but about agency. And again, the UNFPA's 2025 report, The Real Fertility Crisis, the pursuit of reproductive agency, is central here. They surveyed 14,000 people across 14 countries.
And what did they find?
Really revealing stuff. 1 in 5 couldn't have the number of children they wanted. 40% had to abandon their family plans altogether.
40%, that's huge.
It is. And for Indian respondents specifically, the main barriers weren't necessarily a lack of desire, but practical things. Financial limitations, 38%. Housing issues, 22%. Lack of quality childcare, 18%. Unemployment, too, 21%. These are concrete obstacles.
That really changes the narrative, doesn't it? It's less about people choosing not to have kids and more about being unable to have the kids they want because of these barriers.
Precisely. And you see this globally. South Korea, for instance, they've spent over $200 billion trying to boost birth rates.
$200 billion.
Yes. And while there's been a tiny recent uptick, South Koreans still overwhelmingly point to financial limits 58% and housing 31% as reasons for having fewer children than desired. Money alone isn't fixing the underlying agency problem.
So the panic about falling birth rates can be misplaced.
And potentially harmful. The article argues this panic has often unfairly targeted women, sometimes even leading to restrictions on their reproductive rights. It criticizes what it calls target-driven pronatalism, things like baby bonuses, because they often just reinforce old gender roles and ignore the societal structures and, frankly, men's roles in family life. They don't address the root causes.
So the focus should be elsewhere.
Yes, on systemic societal changes, changes that genuinely support women and families, that enable people to achieve the family size they want, rather than trying to force or coerce specific outcomes. It's about creating supportive conditions for choice.
Okay, moving from those broad demographic discussions, our next piece from the opinion section tackles a really difficult and urgent issue: custodial violence in India. The recent death of Ajith Kumar, a security guard, in police custody in Tamil Nadu, it's brought this issue sharply back into focus, prompting a CBI probe. It makes you ask, why does this keep happening?
It's a critical question. And the article points to a couple of layers. First, there's a legislative gap. India signed the UN Convention Against Torture, but, crucially, hasn't ratified it.
Right.
And there's no single standalone domestic law against torture. This, the article suggests, shows a lack of political will.
But it's more than just laws, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The much deeper issue discussed is the entrenched institutional culture within police forces. There's often this mindset that sees violence as, well, necessary, a tool to get results, especially when the formal legal system feels slow or cumbersome. It's a culture that can bypass due process.
That's deeply worrying. The article also touches on the public reaction, which seems inconsistent, outrage over Ajith Kumar. But you also had instances like the alleged encounter killing in Hyderabad in 2019, which saw public celebration.
Yes, that inconsistency is telling. It suggests a really complex societal relationship with justice and police action, perhaps complicated by a lack of reliable data on these incidents.
So what fuels this culture within the police? Is it just bad apples?
The article argues strongly against the bad apples theory. It suggests it's systemic. The rigid hierarchy, the high-pressure environment these kids can actually end up valorizing aggression. And crucially, it connects this to entrenched social hierarchies, and even a lingering colonial mindset where marginalized communities are sometimes viewed as subjects to control rather than citizens with rights to protect. Certain groups face heightened suspicion and force.
So if it's systemic, what about reforms? Training, sensitization, the article mentions these. But then you have things like the Supreme Court mandate for CCTV in police stations.
Right, the 2020 mandate.
But how effective is that if, as in Ajith Kumar's case, apparently the cameras are conveniently non-functional?
Exactly. Compliance with these directives seems minimal in practice. And besides, torture often happens outside the police station anyway. Even when cameras work, getting access to the footage can be another hurdle.
So CCTV isn't a silver bullet.
Far from it. And while legal reforms like reversing the burden of proof in custody cases are important steps, they aren't enough on their own if vulnerable communities can't actually access the justice system. The article also points to the often perfunctory role of judicial magistrates in scrutinizing arrests or checking for torture. And then there's Section 27 of the Indian Evidence Act, which allows evidence recovered based on a coerced confession to be admissible.
Which seems counterintuitive if you want to stop torture.
It arguably creates an incentive for it. So the real challenge isn't just passing laws, it's enforcing them with political determination and achieving genuine systemic and even attitudinal change throughout the entire system.
All right, let's shift gears now to the science section. We're looking at India's ongoing fight against tuberculosis, or TB. And the numbers here are quite shocking when you think about it. Despite TB being treatable, preventable even, 800 to 900 people die from it every day in India.
It's a staggering daily toll.
Yeah, and it rarely gets the headlines like COVID or even dengue outbreaks, does it? It feels like a hidden epidemic in plain sight.
It really does. And Dr. Sumya Swaminathan's point, highlighted in the article, is critical. The absolute priority must be reducing these deaths. India has made progress, yes. The mortality rate fell from 35 per 100,000 in 2015 down to 22 per 100,000 now. That's good. But compare that to China's rate, just 3 per 100,000. There's still a huge gap. And most of these deaths are hitting people in their most productive years, 25 to 55. It's a massive economic loss, too. So the question is, how do we close that gap? How do we stop these preventable deaths?
And Dr. Swaminathan has a specific suggestion, right? Something about audits.
Yes, TD death audits. The idea is modeled on the maternal mortality review system, which has been quite successful.
How would that work for TB?
District collectors would lead reviews involving partners outside the main TB program, like community medicine experts. They'd meticulously investigate why each death happened. Was there a delay in diagnosis? Was treatment adherence poor? Was there a comorbidity missed? Like the tragic case mentioned of the 19-year-old migrant girl who died from standard drug-sensitive TB because of follow-up issues. These audits could pinpoint service delivery failures.
And ensure everyone diagnosed actually gets tracked properly.
Exactly. And this links to the broader picture of what works. The article mentions Tamil Nadu's Custodial Erapalafidam, the TB death-free project.
What did they find?
Well, they identified high-risk patients and found nearly half were severely undernourished. This really underscores the vital role of comorbidities, diabetes, alcoholism, but especially nutrition. These need to be assessed and managed as part of TB care, not separately. China's success shows it's possible.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting, thinking about finding the cases in the first place. The article talks about subclinical TB.
Yes, this is a major challenge. Apparently 40–50% of TB cases might be subclinical. Yeah. Meaning people have the infection, they might even be spreading it, but they don't have obvious symptoms like coughing.
So symptom screening, which was the mainstay, misses them completely.
It does, and that undermines control efforts significantly. The solution proposed is much wider use of X-ray screening, enhanced with AI algorithms to read the scans quickly and accurately.
Has that been tried?
Yes. In Mumbai hospitals, it apparently boosted case notification by 10–12%. And alongside screening, nutrition is key not just for treatment, but prevention too. Look at the rations trials in Jharkhand. They showed that providing good nutritional support to TB patients' households could prevent almost 50% of secondary cases within the family.
50% prevention just through nutrition? That's incredible.
It acts almost like a natural protector, as the article puts it. Better efficacy than some vaccines might offer.
So it really demands a holistic approach.
Absolutely. Initiatives like the Nikshay Mitra program for nutritional support are good, but rely on volunteers, which can be patchy. Doubling the direct benefit transfer to €1,000 a month helps patients, definitely. But achieving those ambitious 2025 elimination goals, it really requires universal, reliable access to nutrition and adopting these advanced screening methods like AI-powered X-rays much more widely. That's how you protect that vital working-age population.
Okay, staying in the science section, we're actually circling back to fertility now, but looking at it through yet another lens, this time from a UNFPA expert directly. We hear the headlines about falling fertility rates, but this perspective really challenges how we should think about the so-called fertility crisis.
It really does. What's striking is P.O. Smith, the UNFPA Asia-Pacific director, questioning the whole idea that lower fertility is just a simple, deliberate choice. He argues women are often too seldom able to make voluntary informed choices about reproduction. And he cites a really sobering statistic. Globally, about a quarter of women feel unable to say no to sex.
A quarter? That immediately shifts the focus from demographics to basic human rights, doesn't it?
Completely. It highlights this fundamental lack of equality and agency that shapes women's lives and reproductive outcomes. It frames it as coercion or lack of real choice, not just a lifestyle decision.
So if it's about agency, how does that square with how some governments are responding to falling birth rates? The article mentions drastic measures.
Yes, it points out that some governments use incentives, maybe even pressure, to push young people towards having children according to national targets. The UNFPA sees this as deeply problematic. It risks undermining one of the most profound decisions a person makes if, when, with whom to have a child. And it often ends up blaming women for broader societal shifts.
So what's the alternative approach UNFPA suggests?
They advocate for what they call a life cycle approach. It means investing consistently and fairly in women's health, their education, their economic opportunities throughout their entire lives.
Not just quick fixes like baby bonuses.
Exactly. Forget the short-term, often coercive policies. It's about providing real support that empowers people to make their own choices about family based on a foundation of rights. This is vital because these demographic shifts are happening fast, but people's choices are often more constrained than ever.
Okay, so what does real support actually mean in concrete terms?
The article lists some very tangible things: affordable housing, quality childcare, decent work, equitable pay, parental leave, importantly for all parents, recognizing diverse family structures,
All parents, okay.
and accessible fertility services, reproductive health info, especially for adolescents. It even calls for better support and legal recognition for all family types, including same-sex couples, acknowledging that social prejudice can be a barrier even if laws exist. It's a comprehensive vision of a supportive society.
That sounds like a significant societal investment.
It is. And that poses the key question for governments. Are they willing to build these rights-based systems that enable genuine reproductive autonomy, no matter what their country's fertility rate looks like right now? UNFPA offers policy support through its Demographic Resilience Program. But ultimately, the article concludes, it requires courageous leaders willing to look past short-term demographic anxieties and make these long-term responsive investments in people's agency and well-being. It's about enabling people to build the families they want.
All right, for our final deep dive today, we move to the text section. This piece explores electoral integrity in India, prompted by a recent Supreme Court directive about revising electoral rolls in Bihar. It makes you think about something really fundamental. How foundational is the right to vote in the Indian context?
It's a great question, because India's path was quite distinctive. Universal adult suffrage UAS. Unlike many Western countries where voting rights were gradually expanded after long struggles over property, gender, literacy, India, right from the start, post-independence, granted every adult citizen the right to vote, regardless of caste, religion, education, wealth. It's right there in Article 326 of the Constitution.
So democratic equality was baked in from the beginning.
Pretty much, yes. It bypassed that slow, often exclusionary evolution seen elsewhere. Universal franchise was central from day one.
Okay, but the article makes a legal point here. While democracy is part of the basic structure of the Constitution, the actual right to vote isn't technically a fundamental right.
That's correct. The Supreme Court confirmed this in 2006. The right to vote is defined as a statutory right, granted under the Representation of the People Act, 1951, not a fundamental or constitutional right in itself.
So what's the significance of it being a statutory right? Does it affect how it's protected?
Well, it highlights the importance of the mechanisms that protect that right. And the absolute bedrock is the accuracy of the electoral rolls. Free and fair elections depend entirely on having clean rolls. If they're inaccurate, full of errors, omissions, ineligible names, duplicates it, completely undermines the one person, one vote principle.
Oh, so?
It opens the door to impersonation, it can disenfranchise genuine voters, and ultimately it can distort the election outcome. So while the Election Commission has the power and the duty to revise the rolls,
There's a balance to strike.
a very delicate balance. Vigilance in cleaning up the rolls has to be matched with ensuring inclusion. Every genuine voter must have their right to be represented protected. The Supreme Court nudging towards accepting more documents like Aadhaar or ration cards in the Bihar case kind of points to this need for accessibility alongside accuracy.
Now, the article mentions a specific, sometimes controversial aspect: citizenship verification during roll revision, as came up in Bihar. What's the legal standing on that? Does the onus fall on the individual to prove citizenship?
The Supreme Court has actually been quite clear on this, going back some way. They've ruled against placing the onus of proof of citizenship solely on individuals during electoral roll revisions.
Okay, so it's not up to the voter to prove it proactively.
Not primarily, no. The court, in cases like Lal Babu Hussain versus ERO back in 1995, emphasized that electoral officers have a duty. They must conduct a full inquiry, consider past inclusion in roles, follow quasi-judicial procedures, and adhere to principles of natural justice before deleting anyone's name.
So mere suspicion isn't enough grounds for removal.
Absolutely not. There have to be due process. This protects citizens against arbitrary disenfranchisement and upholds the integrity of the whole process. Voting is treated as a right to be safeguarded, not a privilege easily revoked.
So it really comes down to shared responsibility then.
Exactly. Safeguarding the vote isn't just the Election Commission's job. The article really stresses the importance of public awareness, empowering voters themselves to check their details, to be, as it puts it, active custodians of electoral integrity. Maintaining that balance, vigilance against errors, but prioritizing inclusion and due process that's crucial for the ongoing health of India's democracy. It's how people get to freely choose their government.
Thank you for listening. If today's episode gave you something useful, consider following us on Spotify so you're the first to hear the next one. You can give suggestions by contacting on Twitter handle given in the episode description. We are always eager to hear what our listeners want to be informed about. We wish you a great day.